This presentation is not about behavior. It's not about euthanizing dogs for behavior, and I know I've gotten a lot of questions about that today. And before we start, I think we all are on the same page that this isn't about anything inherent about the dogs we're talking about. It's not about any breed or bully breed or categorization. This is about dogs that are still one of the most at-risk groups in all of our organizations. And they're not at risk because there's anything wrong with them. They're at risk because of things like breed restrictions in housing. How many of you are dealing with that problem? Yeah. So why we're mentioning this is not to feel helpless, because there is a lot we can do to overcome that, but it is to acknowledge that this isn't really about the dogs. It's about overcoming tremendous obstacles that exist in society that are making it hard for these dogs to get out alive. Does that make sense? That guy sat in our shelter for like 3 months, and because he has that weird kind of fugly bump on his head, no one adopted him. He's just a little funky looking, and he's experienced decline to the point of being at risk for being killed for behavior. And I wanted to put him in here as an example because it's a reminder to me that every minute an animal spends in our shelter, particularly a big dog, they become more and more at risk due to shelter-based behaviors.
So for this presentation, what do we mean when we say big dogs? We're not going to break it down to a weight or over 30 pounds or anything like that. Everyone kind of has a different idea of what a big dog is. And so really it's just talking about any dog that's taking a large kennel in your facility or a large foster home. So we know that's really valuable real estate. So hopefully we're going to touch on a lot of those things today.
So for you guys, what is the weight? Do you guys have a weight where you start to put dogs in a big kennel? 30 pounds? Yeah. It's about average. Okay, so we're talking about any dog over 30 pounds because we're really talking about the real estate it's taking up in the shelter. So we sat around and thought about what are the 10 things we're doing that are helping us in Austin save 98% of the big dogs, right?
99.
Oh. Okay. And when we say that, we mean noses in, noses out. That's no animals backed out of that equation, regardless of why they were surrendered. And in San Antonio, in a tremendously challenging environment, how many animals are you all saving? How many dogs are you all saving a year?
About 6,000.
6,000. One of the challenges is that there's just so darn many big dogs coming into our shelter. And have any of you had the feeling where you see another one walking in the door? And you can see it's kind of like a, 4-year-old sort of average-looking, brindly dog. Do any of you ever feel your stomach drop? It becomes even more critical for big dogs that we really start to work harder on the end. That means they never come into our care. Once they come into our care, that has to set off a whole nother set of acts to get them out. But most of them don't ever need to come in. And I'll give you one example I'm in Pima County, Arizona now. Our intake's about 18,000 a year. We have erected a giant, and I'm not kidding, a giant circus tent because we were killing so many dogs for space. It didn't have a permanent structure. So we have a circus tent set up. It's been up for 4 years. It holds about 150 dogs at a time. In the last 4 years, it's saved 20,000 lives. But at the same time, our return to owner rate is less than 10%. And we do very little to proactively get animals home once they come in and to keep them out of the shelter. And so this year we're dedicating just as many resources to getting them home once they come in. Because do you notice, is this true in some of your shelters, that the animals are healthier when they come in? They're healthy than 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We're seeing healthier, better cared for animals. They have homes. We just have to find them. So we're doing more to get them home, and we're doing a lot to reduce the number that are coming in. We got a grant from the ASPCA called Keeping Families Together. We just offer to pay pet deposits. We offer to pay for medical care that owners can't afford. And you might say that's nuts, and why are we paying for private services for people? Well, it costs us a lot more to take each one of those animals in. This year, through providing support, we started this call center called the Pet Support Center. And we just started, actually one of our Pet Support Center employees is here if you want to talk to her, she's awesome. But we started just trying to keep big dogs from coming in. Within 6 months of the program, we're getting 8,000 calls for help every month. 8,000 people calling us saying, I don't want to surrender my pet. I need help. I need help to keep my animal at home. And so as we're doing that, we were able to bring intake down in the last 5 years from 28,000 animals to 16,500 last year.
You're not going to say like the cool stuff you did in Austin when you were here? The fencing fund and managed intake?
Go, you do it.
At Austin Animal Center, while Kristen was here, and they're still pulling it off, there's a fund that if there's an owner who's, the thing that's keeping them from keeping their pet is their fence falling down, Austin Animal Center will swoop in and pay for that fence to get put back up so that that dog stays home. They've shifted their intake center to a pet resource center, right? Just from a cultural, just changing the words, changing the verbiage. It's not just a assumed dumping ground for animals. Let's work with you and work with the community to find out what the reason is that your pet is becoming homeless, and let's prevent that so that dog never even comes into the shelter.
Y'all, stop calling it intake. Like, just stop. Change the name tomorrow, because you're setting up expectations when you do that. We changed the name. In Austin, it was Pet Resource Center. In Tucson, it's Pet Support Center. We totally changed the community's expectation, and we did it in a matter of about a year. And now when people come to us, they don't come with the expectation that they get to dump their pet or leave their pet that day. They come with the expectation that we're going to try to help them in any way we can. And it really changes not just your intake, but your relationship with your stakeholders in your community.
So for transfer partnerships, it's absolutely crucial. If you have a high volume shelter, if you're at risk of euthanizing for space, having those outlets is really important. When San Antonio Pets Alive started, there were other rescues, very established humane societies, great budgets, lots of funding, but you'll hear it a lot this weekend, a ton of duplication of efforts. So these rescues were literally fighting amongst each other with adopters for this sort of what we call kind of the top tier of animals. So that whole volume of animals, you know, the B or the C team, whatever you want to call it, was being overlooked. And there is an argument that you could say, well, we're going in to get these kind of turnkey dogs and cats so we can adopt them faster, so you can come back. But you're not coming back ever for that B and C team. They're constantly getting euthanized. So you really need a partner that's going to focus on those the vulnerable populations, or the ones that are getting overlooked. It's absolutely crucial. You can only get so far if you don't do that. So that was a lot of our model, is coming in and just really asking for euthanasia lists, being part of the decision-making process, and really establishing a relationship as different as you might have your differing opinions and everything. You might not agree on everything. It is really important to be able to work together just to save as many lives as possible. So having that safety net is absolutely crucial.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, like, I keep hearing in shelters them being like, I don't want to transfer out or get rid of the easy animals. I want to keep those in the shelter so we have a better variety. What are your thoughts? Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that variety, I mean, it's important, but if you just start doing the work and just start life-saving, variety is going to come with it, because it's not that we have 100 black dogs that are at risk of being euthanized, or 100 orange kittens or something. You're going to get the variety anyway. But it is really important just to look at the ones that, you know, if people are fighting over the same dogs, you're really not going to get anywhere. So really looking at those two populations is important.
Yeah, and I mean, if you open up a parvo program, you will get variety, because the majority of the puppies coming to you are highly adoptable puppies once they get through the parvo program as well. So we always like to joke, if you see some sort of purebred, really cute thing, he probably just survived parvo, and now he gets to go home.
Yeah.
Mike and I in Austin, one of the things that we started to say is, like, fine, leave us all the pit bulls. Like, leave us all the big dogs. Leave us the hard dogs. Just get the easy stuff out. And you know what? We never had a problem with variety. That didn't impact our organizations negatively. People wanted to come see adoptable animals, and we provided those for them.
And, you know, just to finish up the slide, I think one of the really cool transitions in Austin is that us as the safety shelter, the safety net shelter for Austin Animal Center, we're not going in there and competing with any other rescue group or competing with adopters. Whatever Austin Animal Center isn't able to provide for, that's who we're going to sit back and wait for while everything else shakes out. Today, when Austin Animal Center is overcrowded and we need to help out with space, a space pull these days, now that we're at the stage that we're in Austin, is a adult pit bull type dog who's dog social and is probably pretty friendly with humans. That's a dog now that we consider a turnkey dog, because we have programs in place that, all right, if he's social, we can throw him out in playgroup, boom, throw him in the CGC program, great, and he gets the heck out of here and goes home. So it's pretty awesome that even dogs like that have become our easy space pulls.
Okay, so this is where you're going to tell us what you think, but you have to talk really loudly because I don't hear very well. So shout out what you think some common barriers in your community or shelter are to adopting out big dogs, and then Mike will interpret that for me.
Wow. Cost. So adoption fees? Yeah, as far as why people aren't adopting your dogs.
Reputation of the breed.
Size, housing restrictions, breed bias. So let's expand on adoption policies. What adoption policies do you think exist that are creating barriers?
Do any of you hear adoption counselors saying things like, I don't know if you're ready for this breed. We're really looking for an experienced dog owner. Do you hear things like that ever?
And that's what, I'm very happy that the majority of the room was easily able to pull out really important obstacles that we all need to be solving. And yeah, it's being talked about ad nauseum as far as the things that we can easily remove: vet checks, landlord checks, all the things that we can, I think, operationally say, you know what, we're going to just stop that. That's going to be removed from the application. I think that's all crucial and it's all important. I think what Kristen's alluding to is potentially more of a language shift, more of breaking habits that aren't as easy to remove as just, let's take them off this piece of paper. It's how do we talk about these dogs? Are we actually not sending them home because we're saying, well, do you have any dogs or kids at home? There's nothing that we're doing on paper that's restricting this adoption, but the way we're talking about these dogs or the way we're talking to our public could be even a larger obstacle.
What?
Absolutely. Judgments.
Yeah, I mean, even when we say things like reputation of the breed, when we use that language, we're actually sort of affirming the idea that pit bull dog is a breed, when we know it's really the name given to any one of 20 breeds and combinations of those. So language matters, and how I think as leadership, which all of you are, and as the experts, the language we use is what everyone's going to copy. And it really matters when we're talking about big dogs. Anytime we make them different than any other animal in our shelter, we're affirming that idea.
So the question was, well, what do you do if there are restrictions for that dog? Absolutely. That's pretty much our entire shelter, given our role in Austin Animal Center, with Austin Animal Center. So it's about how do you start.
Can you explain your role?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point. As I kind of quickly said earlier, we are the safety net shelter for the dogs of Austin, dogs and cats of Austin. So any dog or cat who's at risk medically or behaviorally, that's who we're pulling into our programs, because we've created the specialty programs around the animals at risk within the city of Austin. And so that's who we're serving, are the dogs and cats that we need to be their personal agents and be able to talk about their strengths while also being very clear about what are the challenges and how do we overcome those challenges. So it's not lying, it's not omitting information, it's talking about all of it, but doing it thoughtfully, having a conversation with the adopter, really diving into what the dog's individual characteristics are, what the people can offer, starting the conversation out with just, he's not good with dogs, do you have any dogs? you can get him adopted without feeling icky about omitting information by starting that conversation out much more kindly, by just first and foremost talking about what they're looking for. If they have 2 dogs at home and it's a dog who is legitimately dog aggressive, that might not be a match for them, but you can find that out through just talking with them. And at the end of the day, if it's not the right match, it's not the right match. But there are a lot of people out there who come in who think they want a dog park dog, because that's just what they have in their brain, as that's what they think a dog should do. And if you started out with that kind of negativity, they may not go home with that dog. But when they realize that, well, okay, hold on. So I thought I wanted a dog park dog. I also wanted a dog that I could take swimming, and that would be cool if I had a Game of Thrones party. Okay, he fits those things. He's good with people, and he loves the water, but he's not good with dogs. You know what? I've met the dog. I've heard all these cool qualities. Maybe the dog thing isn't as important. And so you're making a match now that you would not have made if you just started with that negative. We can talk all day long about matchmaking, but...
The only other thing that I want to say about that is that most of us are still killing 20% or more of our big dogs for behavior. In a lot of the country, that number is closer to 50%. And many of us are still doing standardized behavior evaluations on dogs. So, for instance, they're only doing meet and greets with a test dog on a leash, which doesn't measure for dog aggression at all.
That's one of the slides.
Oh. Well, can I say it now anyway, and then we can elaborate?
Okay.
I gotta finish this sentence.
Okay.
So I think if you're still doing standardized behavior evaluations and you are not confident, many of us who say not good with cats, not good with dogs, we don't actually know that information, and we'll talk a little bit about that, obviously.
Stay tuned. I'll go. So we absolutely have to be able to spread the influence that we have over these dogs. We have to build an army of people to help us. We are outnumbered. No matter what your resources are, you are outnumbered. So we absolutely embrace creating a easy to access program that empowers your volunteers to do the work that you're trying to do, and to do it and to blur the lines between staff and volunteers. Just because you're just a volunteer doesn't mean you can't be a part of the life-saving efforts, just like any paid staff member does. And so we are all about teaching our volunteers how to integrate into all aspects of leadership in terms of handling any of our really naughty dogs. You have to be able to create a program that really brings in your community to help you achieve it, whether it just be from an enrichment standpoint, dog walking, adoption counseling, training. We have volunteers that are training dogs that honestly they could be hired as behavior staff at shelters around the country, and it doesn't matter that you're just a volunteer. We have to grow our resources, which your community is the most valuable resource there is.
And just to add to that, using people's skills. So for big dogs, for us, something that's been really helpful, a lot of volunteers are photographers or amateur photographers. I've been really utilizing them at SAPA, just trying to get these photos out there, really cute marketing, creative kind of marketing ads. A lot of our volunteers are working at some pretty big companies. They've got connections, so it's a lot of engagement. It's a lot of, people might come up to you, how can I help? And it's easy to point to dog walking, or can you come, help with adoptions? And we have like these 3 categories, but sort of thinking outside of that and playing on these volunteer strengths is so important in terms of helping some of these big guys. Yes. So for foster and rescue programs, no matter where you're at in this stage, if you're just sort of building up a foster program or if you have one already established, one of the things I find, for small dogs and puppies, a lot of people want to foster them. They seem to kind of fly out the door unless they have maybe a medical or behavior challenge. But the big dogs, you really have to push and you have to be creative. So I would definitely recommend just thinking outside of the box and looking at what other shelters are doing, going to conferences like this, really great ideas, you can share, brainstorm. One of the things we just started, which I know quite a few rescues do in the country, but is a shelter break program. And we were so kind of avoiding it for a couple years. We knew it was out there. We didn't think we could do it because for us being so high volume and every kennel is literally, once it's open, we have another dog coming in immediately. The thought of even having an open kennel for 24 or 48 hours while the dog's on a break for us just didn't seem manageable. So we took the plunge and we did it. We advertised. It was a great media press release opportunity. Had people come out just for an afternoon. We offered them to go to a park, go for lunch, go grab coffee with a big dog, and specifically one that's been in our shelter for a while, or even take them out for 1 to 2 nights just as a shelter break. We had that open kennel, but it was okay because we were seeing them get adopted faster. We were seeing they had more adoption exposure. Their stress levels were reduced when they returned. We're getting all these cute photos of them in homes. We're learning, wow, they do great in a car. They know how to fetch. They know how to sit. Didn't mind my cat. We're learning all these really valuable things, and then sometimes the fosters just end up committing to them for the long term because they fell in love. So if we weren't able to kind of take that step and think outside the box and look at what other shelters and rescues are doing, we would have never had this opportunity in this program that we built out. So and definitely, keeping your options open with rescue partnerships. We'll talk a lot more about that this weekend in terms of growing your rescue partners, but building connections, networking with people. Other rescues are going to have more strengths than maybe you do, or more capacity. They might have the ability to treat some orthopedic needs that you have no ability to do, or parvo, or whatever the case may be. But growing those partnerships, having a variety of partners is really important.
How many of you work at an organization that has big dogs? Okay, cool. So what would you say is the percentage of big dogs that went to foster last year in your organization? 1%? 5%? Anybody else? 20%? 5%? Until that number reaches 50%, you haven't even scratched the surface of fostering for big dogs. When we're discovering programs around the country that are doing high volume foster, sending anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 animals to foster every year with one dedicated coordinator. For big dogs, this really is the future of life-saving, to get them out of the shelter. Dr. Jefferson was speaking earlier about how they just don't show their best selves. They don't sell themselves, especially as they stay in your shelter, and getting them to foster is such an easy avenue to save their lives. So how do we do it? We put this thing on our kennel cards on every adult dog, and it says, I'm available for foster too. And when our customers come in the door, they can choose if they want to foster or they want to adopt. And within a couple months of doing this, we're up to about 30% of our customers are choosing to foster, and our big dog adoptions are skyrocketing. Why? Because people feel a lot more comfortable with that option. We don't let it be a barrier that people aren't ready to commit for life. No one's ready to commit for life to like a cell phone, much less like a dog. It's a huge thing. And so to give people that time to get to know the animal has really, really increased our adoptions. And it's so easy. And we don't make it any harder to foster than we do to adopt. It's the exact same process. Does that make sense? That blows people's minds when we say that. They're like, but what about home visits and background checks? We don't do any of that. People don't come to us to foster because they want to like secretly squirrel away our dogs. They do it because they want to help us save lives, and we just let them do that.
So I know APA's, at least where I learned how you can masterfully attend to your animals creatively. I think we'll be decently quick on this, but the priority for all of us is to save lives. And so it's the battle of offering gold standard care to the individual animal, but that can oftentimes be at the expense of your actual goal, which is to save all the lives in your community that actually need to be saved. That's really what it's all about, is managing your resources carefully. Really, of course, we're always trying to expand our resources, but we know that in order to not become incapable to pull the advanced cases that come in, we have to be creative, even if it means crowdfunding for a leg amputation, if it's a hit by a car case, or whether it be working with vets in your community. We have a vet in our community that is very generous and does lots of orthopedic cases for us. And it could also just be, finding a solution that your caring average pet owner would be able to perform. That doesn't mean we're providing inadequate medical care. It means that we're trying to steward our resources responsibly so that we're not, again, doing it at the expense of all the lives in our community that need us and need us to find creative solutions in order to pull them and save them. And so I think that's, especially in veterinary medicine, sometimes a disconnect between shelter medicine and private practice medicine, and having to kind of embrace a different way of operating. We'll see it sometimes when we're either working with veterinarians in the community or even interviewing vets who come from private practice. It can be a different ballgame. Almost similar to, very similar to dog training in that, in shelter, you're outnumbered and you've got to find creative solutions to being able to attend to behavioral challenges. Whereas in private practice, maybe you'd go about it a little differently. Doesn't mean that it's incorrect, but it means you have to be creative.
Can you say the solitary confinement thing?
That's your line, and I think it's brilliant, ending the practice of solitary confinement in shelters. So, and that's what it is, right? It is so unnatural. We're putting them in these concrete blocks, and we're expecting them to then be judged based off of how they behave, stuck into the shelter that we're forcing them into. But I will 100% to my grave say that playgroup absolutely needs to be just as standard as vaccinating upon intake and all the things we're talking about, open adoptions, playgroup. It just has to happen. And so we talk all day long about all the benefits of it, but I really don't believe you can look yourselves in the eye and say that you're truly attending to your dogs if you're not offering them this outlet. And we can talk all day long, but.
So, pretend you're on an alien planet. You get swooped up by these aliens. They lock you in a creepy cage. They don't let you speak to any of the other humans. They lock you in it for 5 days. No one touches you, but they give you bowls of weird glop. And you're in your own poop and pee, let's be real. And you're in there for 5 days, and then all of a sudden they come and they get you out and they drag you into a room where they start poking you and prodding you, and you have no idea why they're doing it. And they're grabbing at your sides, and they've got some rubber hand in your face, some alien rubber hand. And at the end of that, the way that you have acted in that situation where you are completely outside of your element, you're in an alien world where you don't understand anything, the way that you have acted in that moment after you've been locked up for 5 days determined your life or death. And this was all that was available to us before playgroups. This was happening all over the country. This was the way that life and death was decided. And now there's a better way. And now that there is a better way to evaluate and understand our animals, we are ethically obligated to be doing it. It's not even a choice or a fun shelter program. It really is an ethics issue at this point. Because imagine yourself in that same scary environment with all the aliens, and all of a sudden, they let you go into a park with other humans, and those other humans can say, it's okay, it's cool, it's fine here, right? And you can be comforted by the knowledge that you are around your own species. Playgroups are so critical, and we have to stop talking about them like they're a fun add-on option to our work. They should be happening in every shelter every day.
And just to add to yes, powerful point, from a shelter or a rescue that doesn't have a ton of kennels, but the kennels we do have, it's always been sort of a struggle, I think, with dealing with people's real fears about it. Putting dogs together that have displayed some reactivity, maybe when a dog goes by. So I think it's really important to make it part of your shelter, your organization's culture, that exactly, it's not an add-on feature, it's something that is actually part of our program, and it's absolutely essential. So when you're bringing on new volunteers or you're bringing on staff, they understand it's not when you have time or after you're done with steps 1 through 5 and then they do playgroup. It has to be part of their day and their daily routine.
Yeah, Austin would not be anywhere near its current save rate without playgroup, plain and simple.
Thank goodness that organizations are starting to put some skin in the game so that playgroups can become a reality for every shelter. Oh, well, I already went off on that tangent.
I was looking for like fake hand stuff, and I was like, I could go with like actual assess a hand, but that was funny. So yeah, I mean, you know, Kristen already kind of let the cat out of the bag, or the long-haired dachshund out of the bag, but yeah, I mean, we'll just say it one more time. I mean, it's and when we say this, I made a point to ensure that we're not leaving you questioning, well, how do we get to know our dogs, right? You get to know your dogs through the programs that you're implementing that tell you, I would say, much more effectively who these dogs are, while the dogs are benefiting through that experience. So you have programs in place that the dogs immediately get cycled into: playgroup, walking programs, field trips, going on training lessons, going jogging around wherever your shelter is, you know, those jogging programs, foster, even just going out to the clinic. Every single experience the dog is having in your shelter is a behavior evaluation, but you're evaluating them while they experience all the litany of things you can offer them. And it's constant. It's a rolling assessment. The entire time they're with you, you're assessing their behavior for better or for worse. You're changing who they were when they came in is going to be different weeks or months later, and you're creating systems so that you're learning about them at every touch point, and you're adjusting what you're saying about them. First week they came in, they were terrified. All right, now this is who they are. 3 weeks later, they're not that dog anymore. Make sure that your staff and your volunteers are communicating about the behavioral changes you're seeing and changing who that dog's profile all along the way. So that's an organic kind of programmatic assessment versus a kind of cold clinical standardized evaluation. And it's not just us talking about it. That study that is available to anybody, the conclusion was standardized testing is no better than a flip of the coin as far as predicting behavior from shelter to home.
And one quick note, San Antonio Pets Alive, we transfer up north, so we're constantly talking to new partners, and we have sort of interview process and see if it's a good fit on both ends. And I always kind of stop in my tracks and we've been judged because we don't do safer testing and we don't do these evaluations, and they'll ask, well, do you do safer? Do you do this or that? And immediately the conversation kind of dwindles down because we don't. And we explain to them, our use of play groups and constantly evaluating the dogs, and that it's more than just a, rubber hand in their face or putting the hand in the bowl while they're eating and things like that. So I would just be cautious. I think it's great that all of you are here and listening to some of these really innovative ways of thinking, and make that sort of help with your judgments when working with different partners, and it kind of helps you gauge who your partners are, because if you do send a dog up there and they are still doing kind of the safer test and all of these evaluations, and that dog doesn't react quite well, I mean, that'll tell you a lot about that rescue partnership. So I would just use caution.
That's a really good point, Claire. And if you needed science to tell you, our Uber heroes, Gary Petronic and Janice Bradley, they've done like the most incredible dog research like ever for many, many years. They did a study, and Mike mentioned it, but I want to mention it again. It's called No Better Than the Flip of a Coin, and they actually scientifically evaluated temperament tests and whether they were predictive, and found that they are not. And the last thing is that if you've heard about the SAFER, have you heard about the SAFER test? The ASPCA sunsetted the SAFER. They're no longer certifying new SAFER trainers. So that should tell you something. They're not even using the test, and they're not even certifying new trainers for that test anymore, to their credit. You might have heard me mention, I made this like kind of awful discovery. We're doing a gap analysis, and I discovered that owner-requested euthanasia. You know what that is? Everybody knows what that is. So like owners bring it with the intention of euthanizing, we euthanize the dog. The average age of an owner-requested euthanized dog is 8 at my shelter. And that was just kind of a really weird wake-up call to me that, when I think of owner-requested euthanasia, I think of like true end of life, like, dogs being carried in lateral by their owners. That's not what's happening in my organization. And it's a reminder that no matter where you're at on your life-saving spectrum, if you're not looking at data, you don't know what's dying. And I wish I did. I wish I was back there for every animal that came in, but I'm not. And because of that, especially as you start to save big dogs, which are still one of the most at-risk populations, data becomes really critical to knowing why they're still dying. And we all have these categories like severe aggression, behavior, aggression. They're all different. There's no consistency. There's no definitions, and anyone can kind of decide what they mean by those. So it's important to dig a lot deeper when we look at the reasons that big dogs are dying in our care.
I mean, be honest. One thing that I have seen is, you've got your large overcrowded municipal shelter, and they're making decisions based on space, and there's a decision to euthanize, and it was a space euthanasia, but you're labeling it as unhealthy, untreatable. You're trying to find ways to kind of make it, you stomach it better. You're looking for why that dog maybe was chosen to have his life ended, and be honest and say that's a space pool. That helps you, I think, really speak to the problem and help your partners understand the problem, because if it's a space issue, it's a space issue. And if you're open and honest about it, your partners and your community can help you overcome that. If you're saying it's an untreatable dog, it doesn't allow there to be really a solution to prevent that moving forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like anything below that last 10% is definitely space, whether you acknowledge it or not, right, Mike?
Yeah, and I would say potentially higher.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Right. I think in the 90 to 95, it becomes like a resource issue, maybe not just space, but it's like another form of just not having the resources and
not having the programs yet.
And when you call it behavior, the public imagines that all the animals dying in your care are because they're all bad dogs. If you're honest about that and say it's really because we don't have the space and time to help this animal, then they want to start to help those dogs too.
You all know this one, but we put it in there because, one, it is still crucial. It does make the top 10 list. But two, we want to make sure there aren't any holdouts. We are also reversely doing this by saying, pit bulls are the best and they're nanny dogs and they're the best dogs in the world. They're just dogs, right? And when I say they, what am I even saying, right? Yeah. So it's just all dogs are individuals. And that, I do think, is important to ensure even in your programming when you're trying to do, I don't want to harp too much, but like Pit Bull Awareness Month, Pit Bull
Awareness Month.
I get
awareness is like diabetes.
I get the sentiment.
It's not like it's like diseases, right?
Right.
So why do we need to be aware?
Yeah. And so, when we set out to create our Canine Good Citizen Ready program, internally we knew we were targeting our longest stay population. That did happen to be blocky-headed, short-coated dogs, but we weren't doing that because the dogs needed the training more than any other dog. We just knew, okay, we're running either into an image issue or, yes, we're running into a housing issue. So in either case, if we can ensure that, the dogs that look a certain way are being put through training and being advertised as CGC ready, well, they have an effect. And yeah, it absolutely had an effect, which is great. But the point, we weren't saying only pit bull dogs get CGC training. It was just looking at who was staying in our shelter longer. But I think that's important that we're not making people jump through more hoops based on how they look. We're not assigning any personality traits based on physical appearance. And that's the biggest thing. And for anyone that's been in the shelter industry or animal care industry for maybe longer than the last 5 years, that might be a hard habit to break. I know when I was brought up in sheltering, everything you thought it mattered. You thought, I think I see some collie in that dog, and so I think we should make sure that when we adopt him out, he goes to a home that has access to water. It's like, it doesn't. And so just try to break those habits, whether you're talking about negatives or even if you're talking about trying to heighten the positives. They're all individuals, and again, it's not just our opinion. The science out there backs it up.
And then just real quick on breaking habits, as simple as this might sound, it's something that we've struggled with. When we pull from the city shelter, they literally have 5 breeds. It's, American Staffordshire Terrier, Chihuahua, German Shepherd, and then like everything else is a lab mix or something. Sometimes you'll see a plot hound if they're brindle, so that's really creative. And so what we were finding is because we're just fast paced and get them in, get them out, adoptions, we were literally letting that breed travel with them throughout the entire process and any notes that went with them. If the kennel attendant at the city randomly, and they have pens and they write notes on there, was reactive or I think is dog aggressive, and we'll literally put that on their euthanasia card. It's just not helpful. But those notes were traveling with them. The breeds that were so mislabeled were traveling with them, and they were going into our organization and we were marketing them that way. So we're at the city is about 90%, still very much euthanizing for space, and we're constantly having to sort of tweak things, and that's one of our biggest efforts right now is just making sure those notes, as fast moving as things are going, aren't following them. Their marketing is, we're actually changing it. We're focusing on their positive traits, not so much their breed, and that's often wrong, and sharing videos and photos. So that's more of our effort right now.
Okay, so when we said we were leaving time for questions, we meant no time. Thank you. It's amazing that you're all here. Thank you.